So today's agenda, it's an hour session, and so we'll be talking about the grant-funded data analytics support available to you through our organisation. Then we'll be running through the cybersecurity essentials element of the webinar. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to have your questions answered live with our experts. So welcome aboard. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. We are the Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, and we're funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. Now, they've been using research to shape and inform society for, I think it's over 25 years now, but there was always something missing, a missing piece, and that piece was data analytics. As a result, they funded us as a centre. Now, our core mission is to combine fundamental research with applied. We don't just want our research to remain within the ivory towers of academia. We want it to have real world impact. We support the research community, the public sector, businesses and charities. We have three main areas, which include methodologies and techniques in data science and artificial intelligence, local economic growth, and supporting vulnerable people. We have leading experts from across the world offering data-driven solutions. And what do we mean by data? We mean any information, and we can see through this COVID-19 outbreak how data, how information has really been used to help combat the disease and to help protect people most at risk. We are very active on social media, so please follow us on Twitter at BLG Data Research. And I'll be looking out for your tweets, so please do share them. Tag us in if you've got any comments, suggestions for future topics, or anything else you want to share. Since 2014, we've worked with a range of organisations, both small and large, helping them use data, use information to improve the services they provide. So how can we help you? We can help by providing free training, webinars, grant-funded projects, workshops, and a consultation service too. So there are many ways to help. But first of all, I want to look at the grant-funded data analytics projects. This is a formal grant application process which enables you to access thousands of pounds worth of funding for renowned researchers from our centre to solve real world challenges that you are faced with in your organisation. One example is East Sussex Highways. Now, they asked us to use data to create an algorithm to predict potholes before they even occur. And that's exactly what we did. We used data and we created an innovative model so that we know when potholes are going to happen, so that that part of the road, that part of the highways where East Sussex Highways are responsible for maintaining, can effectively manage those roads and predict the decline before it really occurs. As a result, saving time and money and complaints. But that's not the only way we help. We provide workshops and challenge labs, events and training. Now, much of this is now going to be taking place virtually as part of the social distancing guidelines. And this is just one example of the training that we provide. In 2019, we had some great sessions, including data-driven marketing and impact assessment. And now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Audrey Guinchard, a senior lecturer from the School of Law at the University of Essex. Now, she works at the intersect between cybercrime, data protection, and cybersecurity. She uses new technology and works out how it affects criminal law. I haven't really done justice for Audrey's huge and fantastic experience. And Audrey, I don't know if you want to just say a few words about your work and your experience, because I'm sure everyone would love to know.
Okay, well, thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I have to say, I don't know how it feels on your end, but it feels weird on my end. It's my first webinar as a teacher. I've done lots of meetings before, but having the cat on my lap and being home is just really weird. So what I work on, and I've been working on cybercrime since I think 2002. So certain things have changed and certain things have not. I also work on data protection, which is usually the good side of managing data. But there are overlaps, so that's why I tend to say it's an intersection between cybercrime and data protection. And then obviously in the background, there is always the issue of cybersecurity. So the goal today really is trying to give you an understanding of cybersecurity and practical tips. So we're going to start with first a definition of cybersecurity. Laura, if you can move the slide, please. Thank you. Perfect. So I don't know if you followed the news, but it tends to be now on the news, the new scams, new fraud schemes linked with COVID, with the pandemic. I have to say, criminals do like something that is a bit different than the norm, and they are very, very inventive. I just wish they used their creativity for something else. And really, what matters is to understand where are the risks for ourselves in this situation, as long as beyond really, I think, the pandemic. So when you bounce back, keeping good habits of cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to know is if you were working from home because of the pandemic, because of the outbreak. So you've got a little poll that should arrive that you should be able to do. Because I know some people can't work from home, it's just impossible. Others, it's impossible for many reasons, but some of us is because we've got homeschooling to do. So really it's about understanding where you're coming from. Yeah, okay, 83% of you work from home, and 13 sometimes, 4% not at all. To be honest, I think this applies as much as to home as to at work. Even though at work, if you're working within a relatively big organization, you should be able to have policies in place. I think it's more difficult when it's a small company. So could you move the slides, please? That's it. So cybersecurity is, I tend to use that joke, it's not mine. It's from a US professor called David Solov. His name is at the bottom of the slide, just above the pinky bottom. And it's the best way to protect data security is to get rid of all humans, which in a way is entirely true, even though it's not 100% true. The problem is that we are interacting with the technology and therefore we can't get rid of humans. So the plan B is indeed to train them. That is to learn a couple of behaviors that have to become routine if they're not already. So we're going to, if I remember well on the next slide, that's it, is do you think that cybersecurity is a threat to your organization? So really understanding whether you think you may be a victim later on cybercrime, or you may have a problem linked with cybersecurity. So I'll let you time to answer. I don't know if I'll see the answer. I mean, when I ask this question to my students, so they're about, usually they're in their second or third year, 86, yeah. Yeah, so when I ask my, and 14 don't know, when I ask my students, it's quite diverse, much more diverse than here. And some really think about it, others really don't think that there is a problem at all. And I think with cybersecurity, it's understanding our weaknesses. So if you look at the slide right now, it's on the top right, and the strengths. So where, what is that we're doing right already, and then understanding the weaknesses to improve security. And with that, you need to understand the threats. So here is just an introduction. So we're not going to go into too many details. So if you have further questions I'm not covering right now, just put them as Q&A. Use the chat. I can answer that at the end. There is space and time for it. If you could bring the next slide, Laura, please. Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to do is to present what we mean by cybersecurity. We call it a triad. So it's three things: integrity, confidentiality, and availability. It's three things, and it's a computer science definition. It emerged in the 1970s, early 1970s, actually as a US computer science definition originally, and it was a military definition. But to give you the importance of it, the original document was classified, and within a couple of years it was declassified because they needed it to be shared with lots of people. So cybersecurity is integrity, confidentiality, and availability. So integrity is accuracy and completeness. The fact that when you have data, when you log on your computer, you know that nothing has been added, nothing has been deleted, nothing has been moved around. So accuracy and completeness. The next one is confidentiality. I think it's the one that you're probably most familiar with because it's linked with hacking. Is the fact that information is not made available or disclosed to unauthorized individuals, entities, or processes. So that notion that you know who is accessing what. And that can be on your iPad, that can be on your laptop, on desktop, and on the network. So that's integrity and confidentiality. And then the last one we don't always think of, and it is availability. Sorry. Availability is when the information is accessible and it has to remain accessible, usable by an authorized person. So it's not about confidentiality because here the authorization is not an issue. The person has authorization, but the question is whether the person can access that part of a network. And usually you heard about it, it's when a website is down because there's too many demands. That is availability. So three things to think of, and effectively we're going to concentrate mostly on integrity and confidentiality. And what I wanted to bring is the link with cybercrime, because I think you heard maybe more about cybercrime than you heard about the CIA triad, which is not about the agency, the spying agency. It's just, you can see it, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is linked essentially with the offense of unauthorized access, which most people hear as hacking. It's section 1, so the S1 is about section 1 of the legislation that is abbreviated here as CMA. And CMA means simply Computer Misuse Act. Computer Misuse Act, section 1. The legislation is from the 1990s. It's actually on the date of 1990. And it has defined three main offenses with a couple of things that have been added later on. So hacking is linked with confidentiality, protecting confidentiality, and obviously the offense is a breach of confidentiality. Then you get, if you go on the other across, you've got integrity, and effectively it is part of unauthorized access and modification. So it's section 1 as much as section 3 of the Computer Misuse Act. So you find the same legislation. And integrity usually for many people is when you got a virus, a malware on your computer, and usually the virus will modify files, and even if it is just adding to what you already have. And then availability, so at the very bottom, availability is linked with section 3 and section 3ZA. It is like this, called ZA. It means, it's not an abbreviation, it's just a way of marking the fact that it's a new section in the legislation, and it concerns the critical infrastructure. So it's everything that is linked with DOS attack, that notion that people are authorized, but they cannot access, they're blocked from accessing, and it's linked with a cyber attack. A DOS attack means denial of service attack. So you may have heard this on the news. Sometimes I'm a fan of Radio 4, so you do have sometimes sessions on Radio 4 explaining cybercrime, and you will hear some of those terms. So that is the background of cybersecurity. Now I put the link, but not everything that is an issue of cybersecurity is going to be an issue of cybercrime. So there are differences here. The reverse is not true. Usually, often cybercrime is linked with a lack of good cybersecurity. So while cybersecurity does not always link to cybercrime, cybercrime tend to link so many times with the lack of cybersecurity. So Laura, if you could, that's it, perfect. Now cybercrime, we all hear that word. I think it's on the news quite regularly, and it's not just because I work on it that I say it's on the news regularly. And the thing is that there's two types of cybercrime, and when we hear on the news, it's not always very specific. So I just tend to reassert the definition. So you have the first type is the one you have on your slide right now. It's the computer-focused crime. Usually it's linked with hacking, being hacked. So unauthorized access, somebody who was not supposed to access the data or your computer or your network has accessed it. The target in those crimes is definitely your computer, your data, and the network. So that's really what we call it, focused crime, computer-focused crime, because the target is the computer and the data. Now, sometimes, or depends, you do have another way of using cybercrime, which is more about traditional crime. So fraud, scams, they're actually traditional crimes. Fraud exists for the past 300 centuries. But they'll just have new modes, new conducts, new ways of committing the same old crime. So I call them traditional crimes with a twist, where computers are used to commit those offenses. You also have blackmail, and a cyber version of it, for example, is the ransomware, where you download without knowing it, a software that blocks you, that encrypts everything, and then you are blackmailed, saying, if you pay this amount of money, then we'll decrypt your data and you can get it back. So that's traditional crimes. So a little question that I do like to ask is whether you think that cybersecurity can be achieved at 100%. So is 100% cybersecurity achievable? It's a question I tend to ask. You'll see why. I can't say exactly before I get the result of the poll. And the answer is very important, I think, to keep in mind. And it explains a lot of the tips after that I give and the way I approach cybersecurity. So, yeah, correct. 90% of you considered it's not achievable, and it is not achievable. That is absolutely correct. It's easier in certain ways to achieve physical security of documents because it's easier to control and manage access to a room, access to a filing cabinet, than it is to control cybersecurity. So sometimes I tend to say, and I usually give the link for my students, the spying agencies, you know, the equivalent of MI6 and MI6 included, they use the old-fashioned typewriters, you know, the ones that are not electronic at all, for their top secret, because they know that they don't have to worry, they only have to worry about who has access to the room and how that access is provided. So because cybersecurity is not achievable 100%, really what is important is to understand what are your assets, what do you consider are really important that if it were taken away, you wouldn't be able, your organization wouldn't be able to function, or will be functioning but at a reduced rate or a reduced level. And from then, assessing the assets, assessing the risks. So how those risks can occur, how they can happen, and then obviously minimizing those risks. So it tends to be a 3-steps process: assets, risk, minimizing, management of risk. So legally, cybersecurity is covered by a number of legislation, but the one that is most likely to be applicable to you, because on your computer, on your mobile hard drive, on your iPad, you will have personal data. So data which make an individual identifiable. So it's not necessarily information about the name of a person, it's simply having enough information to retrieve who that person is, to find out who that person is. So personal data is the GDPR, and it's Article 25 and Article 32. And the article that you have on the screen, it's the article I took it out, it's 32. It really states, if you like, quite clearly in legal terms, I know it might not be clearly to you, but that 100% is not achievable. It says, taking into account the state of the art, so the state of the technology, what can be feasible, what is feasible.
Hi everyone, I can see that Audrey has just frozen, so we'll just give her a few minutes. Audrey, can you hear us again now?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
And now you just froze briefly, so I wasn't sure what the...
Perfect then, thank you, Laura.
Get back over to you.
Tell me again, because nothing changed around me, so...
we heard completely up to the Article 32 section that you were talking about.
Okay, so, and somebody said that it didn't freeze on their end. So what I was saying is, the text you have on that slide is the text of 32, Article 32. It's saying that cybersecurity is about using the state of the art, so the good technology, up-to-date technology, not something too old. The cost of implementation, so it's recognizing that you could have better security, but if it costs you much more, it might not be feasible for your organization. And obviously that will change according to the size of the organization. And obviously the nature of the processing. So what type of use of data do you do? So it's not about saying that it's perfect security. It's about saying that you ensure, it's the second bit, a level of security appropriate to the risk. So that notion that you balance risk with cybersecurity behavior. So most of the risks are concentrated on confidentiality and integrity. It's not on availability on the website. I mean, for a small organization, it's very rare that you would be victim of a DOS attack, so a denial of service attack, where you'll be, you know, have too many daemons and not be able to cope with it as a form of crime. I think it can happen for functionality, but it's quite unlikely. So it's effectively confidentiality and integrity, and you have the typical ones, the ones that are one day or another will happen, is accidental, unlawful destruction of data, loss of data, which is usually linked, obviously, alteration, so modification, fraud and scams. The common word is phishing. Phishing is not a legal term, but we use it ordinarily. Unauthorized disclosure, so that notion that the person has accessed and the access can be authorized but did not disclose the data to the right person. Unauthorized access, so proper hacking, and then blackmail with ransomware. So those risks have increased. If you look on the slide, you've got three elements. Two are from newspapers. I have to say, I think I took The Guardian. So one is saying about, two are saying about fraud and cybercrime. So what they mean here, cybercrime is hacking, fraud is phishing. Another one is the fact that already fraudsters made a lot of money. And one that is sometimes in the background, which is Zoom bombing. So, you know, when somebody like today would be coming in, not being really authorized, and then put controversial materials, which can be as much as pornography as simply extreme hate speech, or just annoying, really. So that's the type of risk that exists currently. But those risks are not new. They're just renewed, I would say, and a little bit more important, simply because a lot of people are online now. So that's it. So what you saw 2 slides before when I explained the risk, it's actually taken from the ICO. So ICO, if you see data security trends according to ICO 2019. So ICO, if you haven't heard of it, it's the abbreviation of Information Commissioner Office. So Information Commissioner Office. And the Information Commissioner Office is simply the regulator for data protection. And because security is part of data protection, they have statistics on what they tackle on a daily basis with violation of the GDPR. And so I put the list taken from their Excel sheet, and you can see that what I consider the most important, because what you have on their documents is also the percentage. And alteration of data is one of the top. Then it's simply emailing to the incorrect recipient. And I'm sure it all happened. I mean, it happened once or twice to me. It's sending the data of the wrong data subjects shown in the client portal. So wrong data shared with the wrong person, or should not have been shared at all. And then number 10, so you've got then different things, failure to use BCC. So sometimes we send a generic email. The people in that email should not be as copied, because they should not see each other's name, and therefore we need to send it to ourselves with them in BCC so they don't see each other. Then you have loss of theft and paperwork, and that can be you know, a USB flash drive, it can be a mobile hard drive, it can be losing the iPad, because usually that's easier to lose than the laptop. Or simply, which happens in a lot of organizations. Obviously, when you work from home, usually it should not be a problem, but you don't close the office door, you go for a cup of coffee, and then somebody has literally 5 minutes of accessing your computer or the data. And then you have hardware and software misconfiguration. So usually that means simply not updating the software on a regular basis, and that leaves security gaps. So those trends are what is currently happening. Obviously, there's always a bit of delay with statistics, so it's 2019, last quarter. So with the GDPR, a lot of people have heard of it. It's up to 20 million if there is a security breach, there is a fine possible. It goes up to 20 million or euros, or 4% of the turnover. Now, I know it scares a lot of people. No regulator is ever going to ask a small organization 4% of their turnover or 20 million. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be proportionate to what, to the level of lack of security, but also to how they manage once the breach has happened. So you should not fear in that sense the regulator. The regulator will take into account the problems, the different variables of the problem. The first variable is going to be is it basic security that has been breached? For example, not updating the software, using a very weak password that anybody can guess. And then it's about managing the breach. So have you hidden it, or have you on the contrary been very open? And that openness is actually turning into the organization favor, with lowering the chances of a big fine. Now, I'm giving you a couple of examples for those fines. You have British Airways. Customers were diverted to a fraudulent website. They had poor security. So effectively what happened, people were typing usually on Google British Airways, and instead of the official British Airways coming up, what came up was a fraudulent website where people will enter their contact details and then, password and username. And then obviously that will be then used by the hackers. It affected 500,000 customers, and it gave access to a huge data set. Same for Marriott, the hotel chain. That was really failure to implement basic security, and there was no due diligence. So when they realized there was a problem, they didn't inform the consumers, their customers, they didn't do anything. They just tried to hide it, which is really the wrong approach. And it's partially the interesting thing that I think is important for organization who thinks of buying data or merging with an organization, is that it happened because they bought a group called Starwood. So literally they bought a company. They inherited their databases, and their databases should have been audited for cybersecurity, and it wasn't. You have the same thing with TalkTalk and Tiscali in 2015, where TalkTalk bought Tiscali, didn't audit it, or audited it, I think, at the end, but there was so many security problems that literally they should have taken the database offline for a couple of days to sort out the problem, and they never did it. So that is important. If you ever merge with an organization, just be careful about their own practices beforehand. So the more practical thing that probably will start to make sense for you, and it's a bit my bugbear, is the passwords. So passwords are a pain, not to say more. Even the person who invented password and username system recognized that it was the worst invention that he's ever put forward. He wished he hadn't invented this one. But sadly, we are stuck with passwords. It's common now. So we do have to have good practices in place. And the first one is, if you can, use long passwords. And I'm saying if you can, because some websites don't allow you. You're not allowed to put more than 8 characters, and they are very prescriptive in the way you have to use to create your password. They are going to require a capital, non-capital letters, then numbers, and then certain signs, certain characters. But if you can, then you use long passwords. And the easiest way for long password is to remember a sentence or a connection of 4 words that is connected in your head, but not necessarily connected for somebody else. And it doesn't matter if it is ordinary words, simply because it's the combination of 4 words that make it very difficult to guess. So obviously avoid association. That will be very easy to guess if anybody looks at your social media feeds. So whether you're on Facebook, something else, Twitter, anything that is public and that, you know, people can immediately see what could be connected in your mind. But something personal, and it can be as silly as, you know, horse, the field you're, you know, the countryside where you go, even if you never do horse riding. Surrey Village, I can tell you Ipswich, where, and then another 4 words. But the combination is the 4 words that make it strong. And you don't have, in that case, to put numbers and special characters. You can, but it's not an obligation. Try to avoid signing in with using a Facebook account, even Apple or Google, and certainly Google, simply because if your Google account is hacked, and it's always likely, then they have access to everything. So it's not just about accessing Google, it's then accessing everything that you have used with your Google account or your Facebook account or Apple. I know it's very convenient. I have seen too many websites saying, oh, you can log by just entering Facebook details and so on. If you can, try to avoid it. It will make your life easier if you get a problem. Try not to reuse passwords for sensitive context. So if you create a password for a certain online bank, don't reuse the same password or tiny variations of that for another bank, or for getting prescription online for your GP, if that's what you do, or anything that is going to be as sensitive as this. So I say reusing password, it is possible, but be aware of what the reuse means. So if you reuse the password and it is guessed, what the person is going to have access to with it. If you don't care, you know, if it is just access to an online newspaper account, because you're a member of a newspaper, you have a membership, a subscription, and you use it for another subscription somewhere else, and they don't have, for example, a credit card number, then it's probably about right. But don't reuse it. Don't do that with your online banking details, you know, and your online details, username and passwords. The other thing that I tend to say for passwords, because people don't necessarily think about it, but now that you're working from home, I think it's really important. is to check your default password for Wi-Fi and for the router. So the router is the machine that you have if you have broadband that will give you access to broadband, and then usually it's used to create the Wi-Fi in your home. So that machine itself, literally that physical machine, has a default password set up by the manufacturer. So if you are with BT, it will be BT. If you are with TalkTalk or another provider, they will have a default password. You need to, it's much better if you change that default password, simply because the default password is very likely available on a list somewhere linked with the manufacturer. So it will be best practice to look at changing it. So you have to go into administration mode, change the password. Now, put that password, you can write it down on your instruction. If you keep the paperwork, you know, usually when you receive your router, you've got instruction manual. Just put your password, the new one there, and choose the longest possible and available one. So if you've got at least 20 letters, so 4 words, 20 letters. If you need 5 words to reach the 20 letters, do at least 20 letters. And you only need to change it once. I mean, after 3 or 4 years, you may want to change again. But frankly, that really, it's the fact of changing from the default password to something specific to you. You don't have to change the name of your network. You just can leave it as it is. Same for the Wi-Fi, and there are 2 different things. Your Wi-Fi within your home will also have a password. So usually it's the one you have your guest, they come in your house. They want to use your internet, your Wi-Fi, you usually give them a password. Try to not use the default password, because again, that default password will be on the internet, available somewhere. So it's better that you enter your own. And again, try to choose something a bit longish, so your guest will usually not like it. I mean, I had lots of comments about this to say, oh, why did you choose such a long password? And then I start explaining, and then they do understand. And again, you can keep that on a piece of paper. It's not a problem to have things on paper at home, because the likelihood that a burglar is interested in your notebook on password is minute. A burglar in your home, they're not interested into necessarily your accounts, they're interested into what they can take. Obviously for your laptop, that's something different, so don't put your password for your laptop available and easily can be easily looked at. And always be aware of context. So I have so many, before the lockdown obviously, so many people were on their in the train or in the tube, and they are doing banking online, and literally they're sitting down, I'm standing up, and I can see what they're doing. And I'm not, you know, wanting to look at what they're doing, but I can see it, and that is really wrong. Just be really aware of the context. Who can look at what you're doing and guess the password? So that's all on password. You may have questions later on. Update your software, not just when you have time. I know it is annoying. Sometimes you get the notification, update available, you're in the middle of writing something, you know, concentration, you don't want to do the update now. That's okay. Just put a note to yourself and say, I'm doing it tonight before I switch off. Okay, but don't wait another week, don't wait another month, simply because an update will always have cybersecurity aspects. So they plug the gaps on cybersecurity. So the update is really important, and not updating the software means you are more liable if you have a breach. Yes, I'll answer the question on cookies later on. Yeah. No, this is something that I found quite difficult to explain when I'm online, but system administrator rights to users. So This is usually for laptops or for desktop. When you log in a computer, you've got an account. So for a lot of people, they will only have one account. And that account, by definition, will be what we call a system administrator. So the person who is logging in can administrate the entire computer, the entire system, operating system. Now, what is good practice is not to use on a daily basis that type of account. So the good practice is you keep the system administrator, but you create another account, which is called a standard account. Whether you've got a Mac, an Apple, or you've got a Windows, it will be the same. You go, I think Windows is control panels and Apple is preferences. You create an account and you don't give to that second account system administrator's right. And you use that account on a daily basis for all what you do, especially access to the internet. What happens is that when somebody is trying to hack into your computer, they won't be able to control the entire computer because you will have to enter the system administrator passwords. So it limits the access. And for a virus, which is more likely than a hacking event, the virus will only affect your standard account. It will not affect your system administrator account, which means that if you have a virus, you can log on the system administrator account and then get rid of that virus much more easily. So that is also very good practice. Back up the data, again, at least every day, if not every week, and not every month, because in a month's time, you can imagine how much data you can lose. And the good thing is to have two types of backup and not to have just online backup. So it's good to have things on your Dropbox or Box, whatever cloud you're using, OneDrive, iCloud, but don't count just on this. Literally go back to the physical. You have a mobile hard drive, you plug it each time you want to back up. So you don't leave it on your computer all the time. And you just do the backup every day or every week. And you set up that time for yourself to do it, because I am like you, it is annoying to do backup because it takes sometimes 20, 25 minutes to just go through all the folders and everything that has to be backed up. But it is crucial, and that's crucial for cybersecurity. Obviously, it's also crucial. Your computer crashes because it's old and suddenly you find yourself with nothing. So backup online and offline. Then the last bit, and I'm not going to go too much into details, and they are, the first three are more an option. It's not something that I think is necessarily crucial. Video conferencing security. So now that we work at home, we use a lot of Zoom or equivalent. But for Zoom, to avoid Zoom bombing, it's about not giving to everybody the link to a meeting of a webinar without putting ever a password, and obviously not sharing that password too widely. And without, don't put a video link with no password, no registration set up on Twitter or Facebook, because you will always have silly people trying to then access and mess up with your meeting or your conference. Encryption. You can encrypt. Apple has it on default in the sense that you have the firewall encryption system on any Mac. Windows is a bit more complicated. The main thing with encryption, don't lose the key password with it, because otherwise you can't retrieve the data. So just be very careful. And I think, in that case, read quite a bit before you go into encryption. For VPN, so VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. It's simply a software that you install on your computer, and it gives a different IP address than the one that normally would appear from your computer using your Wi-Fi or and the router. Some people use it, some people don't. I don't. I have thought about it several times, but I've got members of the family who are quite hopeless about managing a VPN. So I simplify my life. I don't use it. If you use it, don't use a free version. A free version usually means that what you do online is going to be used, that is going to be kept by the company, and they're going to sell that data. So you don't really want to do that. Sadly, you're going to have to pay for it. It doesn't cost a huge amount of money, usually per month. It can be around £10. But again, it is a possibility. It's not necessarily something that you have to. Some employers do require. So for example, for me, if I were to access at Essex, the university, certain types of databases, I would have to use a VPN. I wouldn't be able to access the databases without it. And then the main thing that is far more important is to create a plan of action if something goes wrong. I think it's much better to think about it while you don't have the problem, and think about, oh, what do I need to protect? How could it happen that somebody have access to this? What do I do if it happens? For example, you've got a shared Dropbox. One of the users of that shared Dropbox is hacked. How do you go about protecting that Dropbox? You know, and it can be many other things, but how do your plan of action? Do you have phone numbers you need to you know, have in place so that you can call people offline? You know, do it before it happens, because when it happens, we're all panicky. We don't know what to do. And sometimes time is the essence there to act. So you realize something is wrong, you think it's a cybersecurity attack, then you know that in the next couple of minutes you can do this, and it saves the problem, or it limits the damage. So a little thing, because it's already 54, so nearly the end of the hour, is whether your account has been hacked. So if you click on the link, Laura, do we have the time to go on this, or is it a bit rushing it and it might be better to save the last 5 minutes for something else?
I think because I can see quite a lot of questions, I think we'd like to get to people's questions.
Yeah.
We'll go through the questions time afterwards, but everyone can have a go at doing this themselves. So if you want to talk them through the process, and we can share the links as well, but in the chat box at the end so people can click on them.
Yeah, so the link is really useful. I have typed it for a couple of accounts because I have several emails accounts. You can also do your password. But have a go at it. Sometimes you'll see that your email has been, it will say it has been hacked. The consequences, it happens with often the Tiscali emails, the one linked with the hack of TalkTalk 5 years ago. It doesn't mean you can't use that email address. It means that you just need to make sure your password is strong enough to withstand another attack, because it's not enough to have an email address. You also need a password usually. So just and reassess. But if you think that the password and email address has been hacked, then you may want to consider changing your email address, and certainly changing the password. That's for sure. So Laura, I think there is another slide. Yeah, so next steps, I think at home, you know, after this webinar, map your system in the sense of know what is important for you. Is it the computer itself, the data on it? Organize your plan, your response if you've got a problem. Are you going to go offline? Do you have a backup? How can you limit the problem? And then don't forget, if it is your customers' data, then you need to notify them. So also having the details to notify them, so that when you're hacked, you also have that detail still with you. And also notify the regulator. So if it's personal data, it's the Information Commissioner Office. You do have a time limit, so it's 72 hours maximum. After that, you're in breach just by the fact of not notifying. You can, if you're a charity, because I think there may be some Southeast Creative Network people here, ZCAT, you need to also inform the Charity Commission, not the least because they may be able to help you. So don't forget, you need to notify your customers, which means in your plan, you also need to have a way of accessing that list of customers and putting also the regulator that will apply to you. So I think after we have, my top tips. Strong password, I think you've got it from now. Strong passwords wherever you can. The forwards is 20 letters minimum. If you get to 30 letters, it's good. I know it's terrible to have to type 20 letters, but it is the strongest you can have. To give you an idea, an 8 letters, even with numbers and some special character, can take only a couple of hours to guess. If you have forwards 20 letters, it takes about 30 years minimum, and for some cases it takes 100, even with good computer power. So strong password is really key. Use the standard account, not your system administrator. That means that you create a second account. It means also for any updates on your computer, you're going to have to type the password for the system administrator. But it's worth the effort. Backup, preferably offline, not just online. And update your software regularly. Don't wait. And create your plan of action. That, I think, are the 5 things that if you have this, you are already in a much better position. If you have 4 of them already, very good. Just work on the 5th one and so on. I think now that's it. I've got to take the questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Audrey. That was really insightful. Just before we get on to the questions, I just want to highlight the fact that we have another webinar coming up, which is on the changing role of social media during social isolation. There we will have another fantastic researcher talking about new research about how social media is impacting people's mental health and how it's changing whilst we're working from home. So I'm just going to open up now for some questions and stop sharing my screen, hopefully, to see what questions we've got in. Thank you so much for the feedback, everyone. Lots of people saying that they really enjoyed it. So I'm just going to go from the top and ask Audrey, our expert today, some of the questions.
Go ahead.
So one person is very concerned about the recording of conversations over the phone, especially when paying for a service. Now, what advice can you offer, Audrey, for that sort of thing?
On the face of it, there is no I mean, you could refuse to have the conversation recorded. I mean, I know I just done my home insurance, you know, and they record conversation, and so many times we have that message. So you could refuse, and they probably would be able to provide you the service, but they're probably going to go through a certain procedure. They may say, no, sorry, we can't. And in that case, because it's personal to you, you can always ask them to send you the recording or the transcript of that recording. So under the GDPR, you can do what we call a subject access request, and you can ask them to give you that information. But if you like, say no up front, it is not necessarily a possibility. Even legally, it's not necessarily possible to say no up front and then get the service. What you can do is always say no, then they have to explain to you why it's important. But usually that justification is reasonable. I mean, my experience is that it's roughly reasonable. So if you're worried about it because you're, for example, having a conflict with somebody, you can always ask for that data to be sent to you. It's called a subject access request. And if it is a company, they should have a mean on their website to allow you to have that. And it should be free of charge under the GDPR.
Great. So it's under the access request.
Yeah, subject, because you're the subject, access request. Sometimes it's abbreviated as SAR, subject access request.
So I hope that helped. So do cookies have cybersecurity issues? Great question.
So in cookies, you've got, yes, the short answer is yes. It is less problematic probably than going on the website, logging in and buying something online or checking your bank account. You have different types of cookies. You have the mandatory ones that the website can't function without it. They tend to be relatively secure simply because most people can't function without it. So where it gets a bit more tricky is when you have websites, and it's my bugbear, that are asking you to accept functionality cooking that you don't need. If you don't accept them, the website will function. And personalization advertising type of cookies that tend to be more problematic because security is not a problem for them, in a sense that people don't bother. And that's where you could have. But the likelihood that a cookie will be a cybersecurity issue in the next year is relatively remote. It's not where I would see the most important threat.
Great, thank you. I think that's really useful. What do you suggest to improve user password strength beyond user education and policies, which haven't already been sufficiently effective?
So I'm not sure to understand the question.
I'm not sure. Perhaps you covered it as part of your slides, but just to reiterate, what would you?
Yeah. So a strong password depends on what the website allows you to do. So to give the University of Essex example, long ago, about 5 years ago, we used to have to enter letters with numbers and special characters. A couple of years ago, they switched to allowing this and also allowing the full words. So, or, something long with a minimum, I think they require a minimum of 16 or 20 letters. I can't remember. Sorry, I can't remember when I last changed my password. I think that was 3 months ago. 16, thank you. If you go for 20, aim for 20, 24. Aim further than 16 is much better, simply because it takes longer. So the longer it takes to guess the password, the more secure you are. Simply because hackers, they tend to go where the weakness is. They're not going to bother guessing 24 letters if they can guess an 8 letter or 16 letters. They just go where is the weakest point.
Great. So there was another one, a question that came in directly to me, which was around the use of systems such as KeyPass. Are they secure and recommended, and which is the best one? So for those that don't know, KeyPass is a piece of software or a system which kind of collates your passwords. So you only need to remember one password, and in there will be recorded all of your passwords.
All right. So yeah, it depends of a number of things. One of them is the level of mobility that you have. Obviously, I know most of you are now working from home, so you're not being really mobile. But to give you an idea, for me, I don't use them, not because I don't believe in them, but simply because I use too many different computers on which I don't have the system administrator rights, and therefore accessing my password manager becomes much more difficult. So I don't use them. But you can, if you always use the same laptop and tablet, all the time, then yeah, do so. You can have KeyPass, you can have, I think the other one is 1Password or Password 1. I never remember where the number 1 is. I think actually if you go into the I Have Been Pawned website, you know, the link on the slides, they will advertise for this software. It's not the only one available. Don't use one that is free of charge, because it means that they're not secure enough and they will sell your data. So it's not what you want. And I would say just go online to get a good tech review. You know, it could be Macworld or equivalent if you have a Mac, the equivalent for Windows. Look, they will always have an issue on password managers, and look at them and then choose according to your budget and your needs. But if you are constantly moving and you actually are using a mobile hard drive more than anything else, then it might be easier to think about securing that mobile hard drive rather than securing everything else.
Okay, so we've got a couple more minutes for the final few questions, so please do type them in the box. I've got another one sent through straight to me, which is around your advice on off-the-shelf cybersecurity such as McAfee. Is it enough?
Sorry, Lorna, I was about to interrupt you, because I think the person who wrote the question on password strength then meant user keeping pet names as password. It relates to what I said earlier. Don't use something that is personal and that anybody can guess by your social media feed or knowing a little bit about your life. So, for example, for banking online, I absolutely hate banking online, because they usually ask you the questions of what is your mother's maiden name, what is your first pet's name, and where were you born? I mean, I usually lie on those questions, okay? The main thing is remember how you lied and what you put for lying. But it is indeed important not to put the reality of it, especially your mother's maiden name. Anybody who has access to the electoral register, depending on how you manage this, may actually guess it. So just don't use that. Laura, your questions, you had a question.
Yeah, what are your views on off-the-shelf cybersecurity such as McAfee, and is it enough?
McAfee, I think of what I remember, had no issues of cybersecurity recently. I think it was Avasoft that was problematic, simply because they were with a company called JumpSoft, and they were selling the data without Avasoft knowing. The one thing that I would recommend is you have also Sophos that is available. The main thing I recommend is something that is relatively well known and not something coming from Russia. I know you've got Kaspersky, that has been an antivirus for quite a while. The problem is that they're based in Russia, and I wouldn't trust them in the slightest. It's not that I trust many others, including the US, but I think of the two, one is less trustworthy than the other.
Great. So I think that is the end of the questions today. I just wanted to thank everyone again for attending today's webinar. I hope that you found it really useful. I know there was a lot of really useful tips and advice from Audrey. If you've got other topics that you would like us to cover in the future, please send them over to me via email. We just want to thank our partners today. Hopefully you can see my screen. This webinar has been brought to you in partnership with CCAD, so Southeast Creatives, who, like the Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, provide support for organisations in the East of England. We cover UK-wide, helping organisations benefit from data analytics. So if you'd like to find out more about our work, the work of CCADs, or if you have any questions for Audrey, please send them through to me via email or post them on social media and we'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, all. I hope it was not too quick in the pace. It was, I'm really pleased. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.